The air in the dining room was thick and expensive. It always smelled like that, a mix of old cherry wood polish and the faint, permanent dustiness of things that are never actually used, just admired. Mom, Eleanor, sat at the head of the long table. Her back was straight enough to crack. She wore the pearl choker, the one she saved for funerals and necessary executions. This was an execution. "Rachel," she said. Her voice was too loud for the small space. It cut through the quiet hum of the central heating and the low, nervous scrape of Dad's shoe against the rug. I watched her hands. They were resting on the heavy, cream-colored envelope. The envelope held the will. Dad, Robert, sat opposite me, nursing a highball of cheap, smoky scotch he insisted was a single malt. He wouldn't look at me. He just stared at the ugly, ceramic fish centerpiece we had owned since 1988. My brother, Mark, was late, naturally. He showed up 30 minutes after the scheduled time, smelling faintly of stale beer and cheap cologne, wearing a wrinkled golf shirt he claimed was vintage. He didn't bother apologizing. He just slumped into the chair next to Mom and grabbed a dinner roll. "So, now that everyone has decided to grace us," Mom began, tapping the envelope lightly, a predator testing the pressure point of its prey. I was wearing a charcoal gray suit. It was too hot for it, but I needed the structure. I felt like if I took it off, I might just melt right onto the antique Persian rug. My throat was dry. I had been sitting there for an hour, calculating the exact moment the blow would land. I knew what was coming. I had known since I was 8, when Mark got the brand new mountain bike for his birthday and I got the used one from the yard sale down the street. "This is simple," Mom continued, adjusting the choker. The pearls looked tight against the skin of her neck, like she was choking herself on purpose. "The estate has been settled. Your father and I have finalized the decisions regarding the house, the investments, and the remainder of the savings." Mark was pulling apart the dinner roll, not paying attention. He was already inheriting everything, so why bother listening? He never bothered listening. "The main assets, the house here on Willow Creek, the brokerage accounts, and the savings bonds, will pass entirely to Mark," she announced. She delivered the news like she was describing the weather. Neutral, uncaring. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I had practiced this moment in the car on the way over. Keep the face blank. Keep the chest still. Do not let them see the crack. "And me?" I asked. My voice was a flat, low monotone. It sounded like someone else speaking from across a long, empty room. Mom finally looked at me. Her eyes were that cold, piercing blue that always made me feel like I was perpetually disappointing her. "Rachel, you get the contents of the safety deposit box." I waited. She didn't elaborate. "What contents exactly?" Mark snorted, a little wet sound of satisfaction, still chewing the bread. "The box contains the family photo albums, the silver serving spoons, and those hideous ceramic figurines your great-aunt left us. Sentimental value," Mom said, dismissing me with a wave of her hand. "Nothing of actual monetary value, obviously." Silence settled back into the room, heavy and smothering. The clock on the mantelpiece, a loud brass thing, ticked 4 times. I listened to the sound of my own pulse, slow and heavy, behind my ears. "So Mark gets the house, worth almost $3 million, and the investment portfolio. I get the photo albums." "That is correct, Rachel." "Why?" The word slipped out before I could clamp down on it. It wasn't a cry of outrage. It was a simple request for data, like asking why the sky is blue. Mom sighed, a dramatic, long-suffering sound that implied I was wasting everyone's valuable time. She leaned back in the chair, the heavy leather creaking under her weight. "Mark needs the support. He is struggling to find his footing in life," she said, looking pointedly at Mark, who was now scrolling through his phone, oblivious. "He needs structure. He needs this security blanket. Mark is 34 years old and hasn't held a job for longer than 6 months since college. He gambled away the college fund you gave him 10 years ago. He needs a job, not a security blanket," I countered, the monotone finally cracking, just a sliver of ice in the sound. "That is unfair," Dad mumbled into his scotch glass. "No, Dad, it's the truth," I said, not taking my eyes off Mom. Mom straightened up again. all sympathy gone. She put her hands flat on the table. The rings flashed in the low light. This was the moment for the true cruelty. "The simple truth, Rachel," she articulated slowly, making sure every word was a physical slap, "is that we felt Mark needed it more. You always managed just fine, didn't you? You never needed us. You were always so independent, so cold." She paused, letting the implication hang. "You were cold, so we didn't bother loving you enough to care for your future. You made your own way. We respect that. But the truth is, Rachel, the assets go where the love flows strongest. You should have tried harder to be part of this family. You should have tried harder to be loved." The words hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. Not because they surprised me, they didn't, but because hearing them said aloud, summarized into a neat, brutal sentence, still carried weight. I felt the breath leave my body. I looked at Mark, still engrossed in his phone. He looked pale and soft. He looked like exactly what he was, a child who had never been forced to grow up. Then I looked at my father. His eyes were watering slightly, but he took a large gulp of scotch instead of intervening. Cowardice, distilled. Finally, I looked at Mom, Eleanor, the architect of this specific brand of quiet, generational violence. She looked satisfied. She looked triumphant. I stood up. I didn't scrape the chair. I stood slowly, carefully, every muscle in my body vibrating with a silent, contained fury. My charcoal suit felt like armor, and I was glad for it. "Is that all?" I asked. "Yes, that's all. We will forward the paperwork regarding the safety deposit box next week. We expect you to handle the clearance yourself." "Fine," I said. I picked up my bag from the floor. "Aren't you going to argue?" Mark finally looked up from his phone, a smirk playing on his lips. "Throw a fit? Cry?" I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw a man drowning in entitlement, clinging to a life raft that was already marked for rust and decay. "No," I replied. The sound was thin, like glass. "It's fine by me." I didn't say goodbye. I didn't offer a handshake or a hug, or even a nod. I turned my back on the dining room, on the 3 people who were my only family, and walked toward the front hallway. The walk felt impossibly long. I passed the hideous grandfather clock that had chimed every hour of my childhood, marking the slow passage of time while I learned that affection was conditional and usually unattainable. I saw my reflection briefly in the polished surface of the entry mirror, a pale, tight face, dark eyes, hair pulled back severely. I looked like a ghost already. I grabbed my keys off the mahogany stand. The front door was heavy, old solid oak, painted a deep traditional crimson. My fingers tightened around the brass handle. I didn't rush. I wanted the sound of the door closing to be definitive. When I stepped outside, the late November air hit me. It was wet and bitter, smelling of impending snow. The sky was the color of old cement. I pulled the collar of my suit coat up high. I walked down the long, circular driveway, crunching the loose gravel under my leather shoes. I didn't look back at the house. I knew every brick, every window pane, every meticulously manicured bush. I knew the dark corners of that house better than they did. And I knew in that cold moment that I had just been handed the greatest gift of my life. True, unadulterated freedom. They had cut the cord. Now, I didn't owe them anything. The first thing I did was rent an apartment that smelled like bleach and other people's desperation. It was a 1-bedroom in an old brick building on the bad side of town, the kind of place where you had to pay extra for heat, and you could hear the neighbors fighting through the wall. I signed the lease 3 days after the will reading. I quit my stable, well-paying but utterly boring marketing job. Everyone said I was crazy. "You need security, Rachel," my dad had lectured in the one phone call he made, days after the meeting, presumably feeling guilty about the scotch. "I need leverage," I had corrected him, hanging up before he could argue. I liquidated everything I owned that wasn't essential. The furniture, the few pieces of jewelry I had bought myself, the nice car. I kept my old, beat-up hatchback and a mattress on the floor. My brother needed the house, they said. Mark needed the structure. I needed rage. I needed silence. I started working 2 jobs. Not 2 regular 9-to-5s. I worked the graveyard shift at a 24-hour pharmacy chain, stocking shelves and monitoring the self-checkout kiosks, from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m. The pay was abysmal, but it was reliable, and it paid cash under the table for the overtime. From 8 a.m. until 4 p.m., I worked remotely as a freelance data analyst and coder, a skill I had quietly perfected over years of hating my marketing job. I specialized in optimizing financial models for small tech startups. I was good at it because numbers didn't lie, and they didn't care if you were loved. They just cared if you were accurate. I slept for 2 hours in the late afternoon, usually right when the sun was low and the apartment was at its hottest, pressed against the mattress on the floor, the heavy drone of traffic outside my window a constant, irritating lullaby. My diet was simple: hard-boiled eggs, cheap black coffee, and instant noodles. Sometimes I splurged on a frozen chicken breast, but only on days when the freelance contract had paid out well. I had no social life. I had no distractions. I had traded warmth and comfort for a simple, brutal equation: time equals money. Money equals distance. Distance equals freedom. The silence was the hardest part, initially. After the chaos of the family and the constant low-level tension of living under my mother's gaze, the sheer emptiness of my new life was deafening. But I learned to like it. Silence meant no judgment. Silence meant no expectations. I had 3 goals. First, pay off my remaining student loan debt. Done in 7 months. I watched the final number 0 out on the screen and felt nothing but a dull, metallic satisfaction. Second, save $100,000. I wanted this number in liquid cash. Untouchable. A war chest. I kept meticulous records. I had a cheap ledger book from the drugstore. Every cent earned, every cent spent. May 14th. Pharmacy shift, $112.50. Freelance payment, $450. Expenses, coffee, $3. Ramen, $150. Savings deposited, $558. The entries stacked up, thousands of them, mundane and repetitive. Each entry was a tiny, invisible barrier I was building between myself and my past. The exhaustion was a permanent fixture. It was a low, heavy ache behind my eyes and deep in the muscle of my calves. Sometimes, standing at the pharmacy counter at 3 a.m., watching the security camera feeds of the empty aisles, I would sway slightly, gripped by sleep deprivation. One night, the manager, a woman named Gloria who smelled perpetually of mint and menthol, caught me rubbing the bridge of my nose. "You look like death, sweetie," she said, not unkindly. "Why are you doing this to yourself?" I didn't tell her about the house, or the inheritance, or the pearls. I just smiled, a thin, tight expression. "I'm building something, Gloria. From scratch." "Well, don't scratch yourself to death before you finish building," she replied, handing me a stale donut from the break room. I ate it anyway. Calories were calories. 2 years crawled by. 2 years of 16-hour days. 2 years of instant coffee and the smell of industrial cleaning products. I hit the $100,000 goal in 23 months. I didn't celebrate. I barely registered it. The goalposts had already moved. The freelance work had exploded. Word of mouth spread among the tech startups. I was reliable. I was fast. I was cheap initially. But now, I wasn't cheap anymore. I raised my rates aggressively. I had built a reputation for solving problems others couldn't crack. I quit the pharmacy job. I needed the extra 8 hours of mental clarity more than I needed the stability. I moved out of the bleach-smelling apartment and into a slightly nicer, but still aggressively modest, studio in a safe neighborhood. I bought a real bed, a small luxury. I slept 6 hours a night now. My focus shifted from saving to investing. The skills I used to model the finances of others, I now applied ruthlessly to my own. I wasn't interested in the stock market, too volatile. I was interested in hard assets, slow and steady growth, and leverage. I bought a small, derelict commercial property in the suburbs that everyone else had overlooked. It was an eyesore, a former laundromat, but the land was solid, and the zoning was favorable. I leveraged the $100,000 cash for the down payment and the renovation costs. I fixed the property up myself over the course of 8 months, working weekends. I learned to lay tile, repair drywall, and wire basic circuits from YouTube tutorials. My hands were permanently scarred and rough now, my nails broken short. My charcoal suit was buried in the back of the closet, replaced by heavy denim and boots. I leased the space out to a local coffee roaster. The passive income started flowing. I immediately leveraged that equity and cash flow to buy a second, slightly larger commercial space, a dusty warehouse near the highway interchange. This one required more capital, but the rent from the first property covered the interest on the bridge loan. My parents and Mark? I had zero contact. I filtered their emails directly to a folder I never opened. I changed my cell number twice. They didn't know where I lived or what I did. They thought I was still working that boring marketing job, maybe struggling a little, maybe living proof that I should have tried harder to be loved. I didn't care what they thought. Their opinion was bankrupt. By the time I was 35, 5 years after I walked out of that house, I owned 5 commercial properties in 3 different cities. They weren't glamorous. They were solid, dependable generators of wealth. I had hired a management company so I could focus entirely on acquisition and optimization. I ran the numbers on my portfolio one humid July afternoon, sitting in the sunless corner of my quiet studio apartment. The net worth total flashed on the screen. $4, $8 million. Liquid assets available, nearly $800,000, and growing. I looked down at my hands, calloused, competent, and steady. They weren't the smooth, manicured hands of the daughter who sat at that dining room table. These hands had built a fortress. It was 10 years after the will reading. Mark was 39. I knew nothing about his life, and that was exactly how I liked it. I was getting ready for a meeting downtown. I was actually advising a hedge fund on their real estate strategy now, when the bell rang. It wasn't the usual soft chime of the building. It was a rapid, frantic jab, the kind of ringing that screams emergency. I walked toward the door, annoyed. I checked the peephole. The image staring back was blurred, distorted, but instantly recognizable. It was my mother, Eleanor. She looked old, thinner, and utterly panicked. Her perfect hair was slightly messy. She was wearing a cheap stained raincoat, and beside her, leaning heavily against the doorframe, was my father, Robert. He looked broken. His face was blotchy, streaked with something wet. He was crying. They were a long way from Willow Creek. My stomach, which hadn't twisted with anxiety in years, clenched hard. Mom raised her hand and banged on the door again, hard enough to shake the frame. "Rachel, please, open the door. We need your help. It's Mark. He's lost everything." The sound rattled the glass panels beside the heavy oak door. It was a cheap, desperate sound, nowhere near the measured, polite tap of the Amazon delivery driver, which was the only sound I usually got here. I stood there, my hand resting on the cool, brushed nickel of the deadbolt. My living room was silent, save for the faint hum of the HVAC unit keeping the temperature perfect, keeping the Seattle damp outside where it belonged. My mother, Eleanor, banged again, harder this time. "Rachel, please, open the door!" Her voice was shrill, worn ragged by either travel or crying, probably both. I looked down at my feet. I was wearing thick cashmere socks, the good kind, charcoal gray. I had been reading a book, a physical book, heavy in my lap, smelling of old paper and dust jacket glue. A small, perfect life I had built, molecule by painful molecule. I waited another minute. I did not move. I heard my father's low, choked sound, a sort of gurgle, muffled by the raincoat collar. They were soaked. I knew they were soaked. It had been raining since dawn, a miserable, persistent drizzle that turned the usually bright cityscape into a gray watercolor. My stomach did not clench anymore. It just felt hard, like a stone I had swallowed years ago, finally settled. I wasn't nervous. I was interested. This was the moment I had mentally rehearsed 1,000 times, back when I was still scraping by, back when I still lived in apartments where the heat didn't quite work. I reached up slowly. There were 3 locks on this door, a standard keyed lock, a deadbolt, and a heavy security bar that slides into the frame. Overkill, maybe, but I liked layers between myself and the world. Click! I turned the first key lock, deliberately slow. It made a solid, mechanical sound. Thunk. I pulled the deadbolt back. The momentum caused the door to shift maybe 1/4 of an inch in the frame, enough for the smell to hit me. It wasn't just rain and wet wool. It was the smell of cheap coffee, stale cigarettes, and an overwhelming, acrid scent of failure. The smell of Willow Creek. My mother pushed against the door immediately, mistaking the unlocking for surrender. I slammed the security bar back into place. Clang. She recoiled. "Rachel, what are you doing? Let us in. We're freezing." I leaned my head against the wood. The cold seeped through the thin layer of my silk robe. "Why should I?" My voice was low, steady. I hadn't had to raise it in years. People listened to me when I spoke quietly. "It's pouring out here," my father, Robert, wailed. His voice sounded thin, like dry leaves. I slid the peephole cover open. The distortion of the lens didn't hide the truth. Mom looked 50 years older than the last time I saw her 10 years ago. Her makeup had run down her cheeks in brownish streaks, mixing with the raindrops clinging to her face. Her cheap raincoat, the one I had noticed earlier, was polyester, stiff and shiny, the kind that held water instead of repelling it. Dad was worse. His expensive suit jacket, the one he always wore for important business, the one he wore when he told me Mark got the house, was wrinkled and damp, clinging to his chest. His hair was plastered to his forehead. He looked less like a man and more like a soggy scarecrow that had lost its post. "You look cold," I observed through the closed door. "We drove 17 hours, Mom spat. "We haven't slept since Tulsa. Mark is gone, Rachel. We need help. Mark is gone," I repeated flatly. "Gone where?" "The house. They took the house and the savings. Everything," she yelled, her voice breaking on the last word. I unlocked the security bar. I pulled the heavy door open just enough to see their faces clearly, maybe 4 inches wide. A sliver of light from my pristine hallway fell across the muddy floor mats they were standing on. "Don't come in," I instructed. "Stay right there." Mom stepped forward immediately, trying to force the door wider. I placed my hand against the edge, firmly. My forearm was suddenly solid, corded with strength I had earned in gyms and through sheer stubborn willpower. She couldn't move it. "We need to talk," she hissed, her breath smelling foul. "We are talking," I said. I let my eyes travel slowly over the cheap fabric of her sleeve, the chipped red polish on her fingernails. "You came here expecting me to invite you in? To this house?" Dad slumped against the door frame, his head bowed. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the small brass plaque beside the door that held the manufacturer's name. "It's a beautiful place, honey," he mumbled, his voice thick. "It is," I agreed. "I paid for it. Every brick, every window pane. You know how much this street costs, Dad? You wouldn't believe it." I made sure of that. My mother's eyes narrowed. The desperation was starting to curdle into the old familiar anger, the Eleanor anger. "Don't be cruel, Rachel. We are your parents. Your brother is in trouble." "Mark's house," I said, careful to use the possessive. "The house you gave him. The house I was told I didn't deserve because I hadn't earned your love." She flinched. The memory was immediate, fresh for both of us. The kitchen table, the will, the cheap coffee, the words. "That was 10 years ago," she argued, waving a hand dismissively. "That was business. This is family." "No, that wasn't business," I corrected her, keeping my voice low. "That was a test. And I failed. You told me Mark was inherently worth more than me, just because he was Mark. And I was, whatever I was, the difficult child, remember? The one who asked too many questions." I pushed the door open just a fraction wider, enough to let the cold air hit my bare legs, enough to make them feel the difference between my warmth and their misery. "What happened to the money?" I asked. My tone wasn't accusatory. It was logistical, like asking about a missing shipment. Dad finally looked up. His eyes were bloodshot and his chin was trembling. "Gambling," he whispered, the word tasting like ash. "He got involved in some bad games in Vegas. The real bad ones. He thought he could double the house money. He lost the savings first. Then he put the house up as collateral on a bridge loan. He thought he could win it back. And he didn't." I finished for him. "The bank foreclosed," Mom said, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial register, as if this were just a normal, temporary setback. "The house is gone. The savings are gone. Mark is—" "He went to ground," He's somewhere in Nevada, hiding from people who want to break his knees. I stared at her. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. My face was a blank sheet of expensive stationery. So, the windfall, I mused. The family legacy. Gone. All of it. The house, the money, the security. Zero. Yes, Mom rushed out, mistaking my quiet reflection for sympathy. But that's why we came here. We always knew you were smart, Rachel. We always knew you were the one who could make money. You're successful. You're a vice president now, aren't you? We saw it on LinkedIn. She said vice president like it was a temporary, silly title, but the look in her eye was pure worship of the dollar sign. I am, I confirmed. I own this firm now. I bought out my partners 2 years ago. Dad inhaled sharply. He hadn't known that part. The air seemed to get thin for him, standing there on the muddy porch. Rachel, honey, he pleaded, reaching a shaky hand toward me. We need you to help Mark. We need maybe $100,000 just to settle the initial debt. The house is a total loss, but we can't let him get hurt. We can't. I looked at the hand he extended. It was wet, the knuckles red with cold. I didn't move toward it. I didn't move away. 100,000, I repeated. The number was insulting. It was what I spent on my monthly security maintenance and landscaping contracts. It wasn't a real number to me anymore. If you could just wire it to the attorney's escrow account, Mom pressed, her voice gaining a manic edge of hope. We'll pay you back. Slowly. We promise. We can work out a payment plan. No, I said. The word was simple. A stone dropped into a deep well. It echoed in the silence between the raindrops. My mother stared at me, her mouth slightly ajar. She hadn't prepared for this. She had rehearsed the scene where I was tearful, forgiving, generous. She had expected me to melt under the weight of their misery. What do you mean, no? She challenged, her voice rising again, hitting the old Eleanor frequency that meant I was about to be shouted down. I mean, I will not give you $100,000, I explained, slow and clear, as if speaking to a child. I will not give you $10,000. I will not give you $10. I will not pay for his debts, and I will not buy you a new house. But why? Dad whispered, truly confused. You have the money, Rachel. Look at this house. Look at what you have. I looked past him, down the long, sweeping driveway lined with carefully manicured boxwoods. I looked at the sleek black sedan parked precisely in the center of the 3-car garage bay, visible through the wide picture window. Because I earned it, I stated. I earned all of it. Remember what you told me, Mom? You said Mark deserved the inheritance because he was the one you loved, and I deserved nothing because I was too cold, too pragmatic, too focused on things instead of people. I paused, letting the implication hang. The cold air felt good against my skin. It was clarifying. You told me that if I wanted anything in life, I had to go out and work for it, because I wasn't entitled to the family security. You told me I had to try harder to be loved. My mother's face twisted. Rachel, that was harsh. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. I was just stressed. We were trying to protect the assets. No, you weren't protecting the assets, I countered, my eyes boring into hers. You were rewarding the favored son. And you were punishing the daughter you couldn't control. You told me I got nothing, and I said, fine by me. I kept my word. I took a deep breath of the damp air, savoring the moment. You taught me a very valuable lesson that day, Mom. You taught me that family love is conditional, transactional, and ultimately worthless compared to financial independence. You taught me that the only person I could ever truly rely on was myself. So, I walked out, and I relied on myself. I built this. I built the firm. I built the wealth. I built the security. I built the life where I am never, ever dependent on anyone else's fickle affection or faulty judgment. I gestured broadly with my chin toward the wet street, toward their misery. Mark gambled away his life because he was raised with the expectation that he didn't have to work for it. He expected the safety net to always be there. He expected you to fix his mistakes. He expected me to fix his mistakes. You told him he deserved the house. He believed you. Now he has nothing. That is the consequence of your parenting, not my responsibility. This is ungodly! Mom shrieked, finally breaking character. Her voice was high-pitched, desperate, cracking. "We are your parents. We raised you. You owe us." "I owe you nothing," I said simply. "You paid for food and shelter until I was 18. That was the contract. I fulfilled my end by getting out and staying out. I am an adult. You cut me out of the family legacy because you found me lacking in emotional warmth. Fine. I accept your judgment. Now, I find your brother lacking in responsibility and basic competence. I am cutting him out of my legacy. It's only fair." Dad started sobbing harder now, covering his face with his hands. "Rachel, please. He's our son. He's going to get hurt." "Then maybe you should have thought about that when you gave him everything he didn't earn and nothing I had earned," I said, a wave of pure, cold satisfaction washing over me. "The man who is going to break your son's knees is not my problem. He is the consequence of his own choices, and he is the consequence of yours." My mother lunged forward, pressing her shoulder hard against the narrow opening of the door. "You selfish bitch. You think you're better than us? We gave you everything." "No," I corrected her, my eyes flat. "You gave Mark everything. You gave me a rejection slip and a fierce desire to never need you again. And for that, I am eternally grateful." I put my shoulder against the heavy door. I was stronger than her, much stronger. I began to push slowly, steadily. "Get off my property," I instructed. "We won't leave," Mom screamed, trying to wedge her foot into the gap. "We'll call the police. We'll tell them you assaulted us." I leaned into the door, applying pressure with my whole body. The oak creaked slightly. Her resistance was futile. "Call them," I said. "I'll tell them the truth. I'll tell them you drove across 3 states to extort money from the daughter you discarded, to save the son who proved you were wrong about everything. I'll tell them you're trespassing. They'll believe me. I have security footage of every angle. And I have very expensive lawyers on retainer." The pressure was too much. Her foot slipped out. The smell of wet wool and desperation was cut off instantly as the heavy oak slammed shut. Thud. The sudden silence was deafening. I stood against the closed door, the warmth of the hallway immediately enveloping me. The rhythmic sound of the rain against the roof was the only thing left. I reached up and slid the 3 locks back into place. Click, thunk, clang. They didn't knock again right away. I heard a low, muffled cry, then the sound of my mother's voice, harsh and pleading, dragging my father away. I didn't move from the door until I heard the tired, sputtering engine of their old minivan start up on the wet pavement. I went back to the living room. The cashmere socks felt soft on the polished marble floor. My book was lying open on the sofa, a bookmark inserted neatly on page 147. I picked up the remote for the gas fireplace and pressed the ignition button. A clean, silent blue flame instantly sprung to life behind the glass screen. The heat was immediate. Perfect. I settled back into the sofa, pulling the silk robe tighter around my body. I picked up the book. I looked at the page. I had forgotten how to read. I could only see the sharp red print of the text. 12,500. Not characters. Dollars. I reached for the small tablet I kept on the side table, pulled up my banking app and checked the balances. 7 figures. Multiple accounts. All fine. All safe. I closed the app, put the tablet down, and went to the window. The rain was heavy now. I saw the cheap polyester raincoat of my mother, a flash of red taillights disappearing around the bend of the cul-de-sac. They were going. Back to the road. Back to the consequences. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel hatred. I felt the profound surgical emptiness that comes after a long-awaited amputation. The pain was gone. The limb was gone. All that remained was clean, undeniable space. I turned away from the window. I had a busy day tomorrow. Deals to close. Money to make. I had earned my quiet, and I was going to keep it.